Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We're always there on Galaxy 19 satellite, if you have a satellite, or Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and a whole lot of social media, but also 24/7 on muslimnetwork.tv, our own website. Arab Spring came in a big way. Even America has a little bit of it. People were upbeat and talking about it, and Occupy Wall Street began as a result. So there was our Arab Spring going around a little bit. Wisconsin, it happened also. And Arab Spring began almost 10 years ago, actually, December 2010. And I hope people will do something about it, some thoughtful deliberation in December this year. And Tunis since then had multiple elections. It has turned into democracy. And some of the politicians, despite power, are willing to share power. Compromise is normally considered a dirty word, but compromise is democracy is all about. I saw some of this success in Morocco and now in Sudan. Arab Spring still continues, although it is, not with the hopes people had. At the same time, it was in Yemen. Something called Jasmine Revolution began, and people wanted corrupt government to be dismissed, and Tawakkul Karman, who named probably Jasmine Revolution, got the Nobel Peace Prize because of her struggle, her stand, and coming out. But different aspect of Arab Spring went in different direction, and the worst was Syrian tragedy. People just peacefully were asking for vote, democracy, and probably Islam as well. And the regime started bombing, and then came the foreign powers and Saudis and Iranis, and then came the Russia and the United States. Misery of human beings is simply horrible. And it has been more in the news. But Libya, that is not as much in the news. It became horrible. Egyptian was successful until military destroyed it, and Western powers were fully in support of that. In Yemen, what happened in 2010, 2011, and some change and resignation and the government, but not full restoration towards democracy. That time, a Houthi, a Shia group from North, they came rebellious in 2015 and took control of it. There came the Saudi Arabia bombing. So Yemen already had different type of civil war, and good in south, one group, and in central part, Al-Qaeda and related group, northern part in control. So what happened there? But when people are fighting, whether you call it war or civil war, what's happening to human beings? Little boys and little girls. And all of that in the midst of a pandemic. To discuss with us are a couple of people who feel deeply about it, both with Yemeni heritage and those who care so much to try to change US policy. And working on that is Professor Shireen Al-Adeimi. And trying to help in the pandemic is Dr. Aisha Jumaan. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
I hope I'm pronouncing your names properly. Tell us, both of you, Professor Shireen Al-Adeimi first. You're assistant professor at Michigan State University and a Yemeni activist by heritage, and you're an educationist who, since 2010, with the Arab Spring type revolution, and then later on Houthis, and then civil war turning into war. What is happening to children who want to go to school?
That's one of the, of course, painful realities is that when there's so much instability in a country, and you've mentioned the Arab Spring. It's almost been 10 years since it started, and I hadn't really thought about how long it's been, how long ago it started. It creates a lot of disruption in kids' schooling, but also that's in a way the least of their concerns when they don't have food to eat, or they don't have water to drink, and they don't have a hospital to go to if they get sick, or medicines to purchase because of the blockade. Education goes down the list of one of the least important aspects of a child's life, and this is unfortunate and horrific to even say in the 21st century. So millions of kids are out of school in Yemen. Millions of kids have been denied an education, and millions more are denied the right to live, which is, I think, the crux of the crisis here, the tragedy in Yemen.
Do you have relatives in Yemen?
I do. Most of my family members from my parents' side, so extended family, live in various parts in Yemen, in the south and in the north, in major areas like Aden, Hodeidah, Sana'a, and Taiz.
So are you able to talk to them? Is some form of communication is still there?
Yeah, thankfully the internet is still available to those who can access it. And so we are in constant communication with them. And that's been our, one source of comfort, that we're at least able to get in touch with our families to make sure that everything's okay. But it's also, Dr. Jumaan will also talk about this, I'm sure, you may feel this, is that we're constantly on edge. Every time we hear of a bombing, we have to check in, make sure everybody's okay, and we don't hear from somebody for some period of time. It becomes very stressful. So those of us with family and loved ones back home have been on edge, looking at our phones, glancing at our phones every few minutes, and trying to live our lives here and our work and all of that, but also making sure that people back home are still okay.
Dr. Aisha Jumaan, I mean, you have a 30-year experience, with health-related fields, and essentially PhD in pandemic. And you're a founder of Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Tell us, in pandemic and war, I mean, the physical distancing must be a joke in this situation.
Well, there are a lot of issues other than the social distancing in terms of the health sector. 50% of the health facilities in Yemen had been destroyed by airstrikes. Also, healthcare workers and most of the civil servants have not been paid salaries since 2016, when they removed the central bank from Sana'a. In addition to that, a lot of what the hospitals need, whether it's medicine, whether it's equipment, and the labs, a lot of it is non-existent. I go to Yemen every summer, and I was in Yemen in June and July of 2019. Unfortunately, this year I wasn't able to go. And people would take me to the hospital pharmacy to show me empty shelves. A lot of the medical equipment that need fixing, they cannot find spare parts because, again, of the blockade that Shireen just mentioned. We try to send in, I'd like to share a personal story here. My sister was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was a reoccurrence. And we needed some medicine for her, and we couldn't, it wasn't available in Yemen, of course, because of the blockade. We were able to purchase it from Cairo, but for us to send it to Yemen, it took 2 months to be able to get it into Yemen, because you can't just send things like you send to other countries. By the time it got to Yemen, Jamila, my sister, didn't need it anymore. She passed away a few months later. So that's just one story of millions of people's stories in Yemen. There is also a blockade on medical evacuation. So there are a lot of people, there are a list of 35,000 people up until the end of 2019 who are not able to travel out of Yemen for medical evacuations. So and now with COVID-19, they don't have enough ventilators. The equipment they have are old. They cannot fix it. They don't have enough reagents. We have a population of 13 million people in Yemen who's dependent on aid. There is no aid in the world that can support a population of 13 million people. And if you look at the aid that's given to Yemen and all the international aid agencies, and I'm very grateful for all the aid that's being given to Yemen, but it only supports about 20% of the population. So who's going to support the 80% of the population? Of course, the blockade has also resulted in an economic devastation of millions of people in Yemen. So when people here and in a lot of countries suffer the COVID-19 economy, Yemen has been suffering the COVID-19 economy because people have lost their jobs. They're not getting salaries for over 6 years. So the situation in Yemen is extremely heartbreaking, to say the least.
Let's define for ourselves. I mean, forgive me for asking questions which may not be very thorough, but let's have Yemen 101. Where is Yemen? I mean, my situation is that one place I gave a sermon about Kashmir, what is happening in Kashmir, and congregations who invited paid for my flight. Of course, I don't charge for my sermons, but they paid for my flight. They liked my khutbah and wanted me to go for lunch. At the lunch, they asked me, "Isn't Kashmir part of Afghanistan?" So unfortunately, our geography is not strong. So where is Yemen? And what is the population? How many people live there? And what is economy like? Feel free, anyone of you.
I can give some context. So Yemen is at the tip of the Arabian Peninsula. It borders Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is to the north of Yemen, and Oman is to the east of Yemen. And then there's the Red Sea to the west and the Indian Ocean to the south. And so it's of strategic importance, and this comes down to politics. It comes down to why, first of all, the British back in the 1800s occupied Yemen for 129 years, and it goes back to why the US has such strategic interest, and it's because Yemen controls Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Currently, about 4.8 million barrels a day transferred through that port. And so this is, of course, largely Saudi Arabian oil, and the US has strategic interest in that area as well. So it's always been of strategic and political importance for Saudi Arabia to have some kind of control in Yemen. And so if you want to, get to the root cause of all of this, is because of where we are, where we're located, and who our neighbors are. Yemen also is the poorest country in the Middle East. Again, we had, decades of colonialism, and then various, separation of North and South because of colonial endeavors, and then various attempts at democracy. It remains a republic, which is different from countries that are surrounding it. So it's not a sultanate, it's not an emirate, it's not a kingdom. There is this drive for democracy in Yemen that is still ongoing. And economically, about half of the population, more than half of the population, lived on $2 a day before the war even began. And so when you think about why it's so devastating now, it's because when you've eliminated people's opportunity to work, the blockade has prevented Yemenis to continue trade. They relied on 90% of food through trade. And when you've eliminated that source, then you're essentially starving an entire population of 30 million now.
30 million people there. And probably a good number of them are younger people.
A large proportion, yes.
Yeah. So when you, both of you mentioned because of blockade, so who is implementing this blockade? Is it part of Yemen? Because Yemen is all sea. I mean, what is 2,000 miles of seashore or something like that? And three sides is sea. One side seems to be a desert or something. So who is implementing this blockade? Is it UN mandated blockade? Who is implementing this blockade, and where is it exactly? So, Dr. Aisha Jumaan, you have some idea about that?
Yeah, I wanted Shireen to answer that, but the blockade is instituted by the Saudi-led coalition. The UN is supposed to be looking at ships coming into Yemen to make sure that they don't have any arms in them. But even after the ships are, inspected and given certification that they don't have arms, then the Saudi-led coalition has the power to either deny entry into Yemen or allow entry. And today, as we speak, there are 19 ships that are waiting to enter into the Hodeidah and Salif ports, which are the largest ports in Yemen. And that, and some of them had been held after giving certification from the UN to enter Yemen for over 100 days. That makes it very challenging to ship anything to Yemen because a lot of the shipping companies right now are not interested in going into Yemen because they know they may sit at sea for up to 100 days. I know from our experience when we tried to ship water filters to Yemen and medicine to Yemen, the medicine that we shipped took over 6 months to get in. By the time it got into the Aden port, which is a smaller port, there was so much backlog at the port that our car to get into the port to get the medicine out, it took 2 months of waiting in line. Trucks waited in line for 2 months for entry into Aden port. And once they got in and we were able to get the medicine out, at least one of the medication only had 1 month before expiration. So all this hard work to get medicine to a population that definitely needs it and urgently needs it, we lost because of the delays a lot of time. And that happens also even with UNAID. So for example, WFP that supports the food ration distribution in Yemen, sometimes by the time the food gets into Yemen, it's already expired and they have to destroy it. So that's why I'm very concerned about the blockade, because in terms of when you count people who die because of the airstrikes, that's countable. You're not able to count people who die in their homes because they're hungry. You're not able to count people who die because of diabetes or hypertension or cancer because they don't have the medications. So when people talk about the total deaths in Yemen, it's a severely underestimate because there are a lot of deaths that are happening that nobody is counting.
And
Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite and Amazon Fire TV and other places. We'll be right back after these messages. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Dr. Aisha Jumaan and Professor Shireen Al-Adeimi about Yemen and life in Yemen. Tawakkul Karman once said that that many Yemeni girls suffer from malnutrition so that boys could be fed. Now, that was a while ago, before all of this catastrophe was taking place. Do you think situation is still the same for girls, or girls and boys are equally suffering because of the food problems?
hunger doesn't discriminate. The blockade doesn't discriminate. There are men, women, children, boys, girls, everybody living in Yemen. 80% of the population needs aid just to survive. Kids are being pulled out of school to try to work because they're displaced, because their homes have been bombed, because their homes have been destroyed, because they've lost their source of income. Children are literally starving to death in Yemen, whether they're boys or girls. So I don't think this conflict like this discriminates among. The only difference you'll see is the people who are more wealthy are able to afford certain things, or people who have family outside of Yemen, for example, who can receive cash donations, versus the people who don't have family that they can rely on or don't have an income. and that's most of the population. So it's along a wealth divide, I would say, but certainly not gender in my view or in my work that I've seen.
Can I add to that as
Yeah,
well?
sure, Dr. Aisha.
So there are about 14 million people in Yemen who are at the verge of famine, meaning that they don't have a meal a day to eat, and which means 25% of these people are going to die. A large number of these are children. And like Shireen said, I don't think it's an issue of a boy or girl. When you have this widespread hunger, it affects everybody, adults, children, and families. We've heard of families of a woman who committed suicide with her 4 children because she didn't have anything at the home, and she felt too embarrassed and too ashamed to go and ask or beg people for food. We've heard of a father who also drowned his children and killed himself for the same reason, because he tried to get support for the family and he couldn't get anything anymore. This is extremely uncommon in Yemen. This is something that nobody would have done before in Yemen, where a family would rather commit suicide, the whole family, because they are hungry and they have knocked at doors, and that's the last resort that they have. That just shows you the level of stress a lot of these families are facing. UNICEF actually featured a girl in 2015. Her name was Amal, which also means hope. And in 2015, her father bought her earrings for Eid, and she asked if she, during Ramadan, and she asked if she could wear them before Eid. And her father asked, why do you want to wear them before Eid? Why don't you keep them for Eid? And Amal said that she wasn't sure that she was going to survive until Eid. How would, she was at that point in time about 4. How would a 4-year-old girl know that she may not survive? And that is because the airstrikes, the most common target for the airstrikes were home. Thousands of homes were targeted. So she was afraid that she may die before Eid. By the age of 7, the New York Times featured the same girl who died a day after the New York Times published an article about her. She was extremely malnourished and died the second day. So when we talk about hunger, these are extreme hungers. People, when they hear 14 million people, they don't understand it. But when you talk about the Amals of the world, UNICEF had said that Yemen is a living hell for all children, boys and girls. It says that, and the issue with malnutrition, if it's killing you now, but if it doesn't kill you, it's also impacting your development. So that means we have generations of children in Yemen growing up with extreme malnutrition that impacts their mental development and their physical development and their emotional development. So Yemen will be reeling from this for a very, very long time.
Is the food situation, I'm so sorry to hear about this. I wish more and more people are aware of what is actually happening to children and human beings. Are people who are living on countryside any better because they may have some, non-city type of agrarian environment in which they can raise something and cook something for themselves? Is the situation in countryside any better?
So Yemen is an extremely water-stressed country. Even before the war, there are virtually no natural water reserves left. And then, of course, with the bombing campaign that's also targeted water facilities, that's made it even worse. And so oftentimes what we see is that, and of course, there's a fuel crisis because of the blockade. And so often agencies are not able to come to the heartlands, the countryside, smaller villages, to deliver aid. So those people oftentimes starve to death. City dwellers can have some respite through aid agencies and whatnot, whereas people in smaller areas often will just die without us even knowing how many of them have died. because getting to those areas is so difficult. Yemen is very mountainous. It has a lot of areas that are very difficult to get to, and without the fuel and without people being able to grow their own food in large scales, it's extremely devastating for them.
You know, I must admit, it will not sound right. When I was watching your interview, professor, at some place, I don't know which place it was, and you mentioned 8,000 people have died, and you know, in some strange way, I felt little comfort. Oh, okay, so this is not 100,000 or so. I'm sorry to say that way. One human being lost is tremendous loss. But is there a problem in realizing how many casualties are? If a hunger is this acute, if bombing is constant, is the number of dead in any way smaller than what actually it is?
So this interview must have been years ago. Right now, the current death toll from the violence, the official death toll is over 100,000 people. And the deaths from malnutrition, hunger, preventable diseases, cholera, diphtheria, a child can even die from a simple fever because they don't have access to Tylenol, for example. Those deaths are in the hundreds of thousands, and we don't know how many. We know that a child is dying every 10 minutes because of hunger and diseases, and these are children between the ages of birth to 5. So we're not even counting all children in this statistic. Every 10 minutes, a child between the age of 0 to 5 is dying, and that has been going on for over 5 years now. So you can imagine what the number looks like when you add all children and adults into that equation. I'm personally horrified to think about the death toll when all of this dust is settled and we're able to do some kind of recounting. I think one death is too many, but what we're seeing in Yemen, many have called even a genocide because of the scale, the massive scale of deaths in Yemen that are going uncounted, unfortunately.
And there is a UN report that estimated 230,000 deaths by the end of 2019. Unfortunately, it's not reported very widely. And that's one of the other things with Yemen, like you said, Imam, is that it's not in the news, it's not in the media. Not a lot of people are hearing about what's going on in Yemen. And part of this is because there are very strong PR firms that are working to make sure that a lot of people don't hear what's going on in Yemen. And so the total deaths, like Shireen said, once this settles, are going to be a lot more than even the 230 that was reported by the UN. I know for a fact that when we looked at the number of injuries in Yemen, Save the MSF alone, that was in 2018, said that they have treated 67,000 people with war-related injury. And yet, if you look at the UN reports, they report less than 60,000 injuries. How could MSF, just one agency that doesn't work throughout Yemen, in their own clinics, treat 67,000 war-related injuries when the total that's reported by UN agencies is less than 60,000? So there is a lot of underestimate when it comes to Yemen.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. Let's talk about little water. You said the water reservoir are either gone, empty, or they're being targeted. It's such it must be a highest level of war crime. So where people get water, those people, food is a problem, medicine is a problem. What are the water sources? Or is it different in different part of Yemen? Some places there's water, other places it is short of water. How people are dealing with it?
People are dying. 19 million people don't have access to clean water. You have cholera, which is the world's the worst outbreak in modern history in Yemen. Many of these diseases, like cholera, spread because people are drinking contaminated water, and so they drink what's available, and then they get diseases like cholera, or they're not able to recover from symptoms of cholera. They're not able to rehydrate. So, we talk about washing their hands, for example, to prevent coronavirus, and people don't even have clean water to drink. There are some facilities that are still in operation, but when there's no fuel to pump the water pumps, then people will continue to die at even more staggering rates. When the UN says this is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, like I feel like people maybe don't understand what that's like, but this is as bad as it gets anywhere in the world. There is no place in the world where there are war crimes and injustices against humanity being committed by the Saudi-led coalition in the UAE and the United States for this long. And yet it continues to be ignored. So the reality is that people don't have a way out. They can't leave Yemen. By the way, the blockade also includes control over the airspace, so they can't leave Yemen. The Saudi-led coalition gets to decide which airports are open, which airports are shut, and currently there are 2 airports that are open in the entire country, and they're both in the areas that are occupied by the Saudi-led coalition. And they can't cross land. Where are they going to go? Into Saudi Arabia, where there's a war going on, and Oman has shut its borders. So people are literally trapped in the country. There's nowhere to go. There's no way out, and there's not much coming in the way of food, water, and medicine.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Professor Shireen Al-Adeimi and Dr. Aisha Jumaan, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Professor Shireen Al-Adeimi and Dr. Aisha Jumaan about life in Yemen.
Imam Malik, may I say something also about the water here?
Yes.
We were talking about it earlier. So water, as Shireen said, is very important for people. And, 19 million people in Yemen don't have access to clean water, but also water is important for agriculture. And with the 19 ships that are being held right now, fuel ships, a lot of the farmers who do have, produce are very concerned because their farming is going to be extremely affected by that. And a lot of their plants are going to die because the fuel is not available. So that's another issue that is affecting Yemen. So there are some agricultural areas in Yemen, and like you said, in some rural areas, they can grow their things. But if the fuel is very expensive and is not available, then that limits their ability to save or grow food for themselves. And there is now a huge concern with a lot of the farmers about the inability to water their plants because of the severe fuel shortages that exist now in Yemen.
So you're mentioning this, airports are controlled and only 2 airports are operating. So are people moving inside Yemen from one area to the other? So internal displacement is also taking place because some of the people thinking, okay, the Saudi control area, at least there's no bombing, let's go there. Is that type of phenomena also happening?
There is wide displacement, internal displacement. I think either 3 or 4 million people who are internally displaced. The answer is not that simple of where to go, because in areas that are controlled by the Saudi-led coalition, yes, they're not bombing those areas, but they have created chaos in those areas. For example, in Aden, where I'm from, there is a power struggle between separatist groups that are supported by the United Arab Emirates and Hadi groups, unity groups, so-called unity groups that are supported by the Saudi-led coalition, and they've each set up their own government in those areas. Of course, President Hadi, who's the UN-recognized president, remains in exile, is not really able to. He makes official visits to Yemen every now and then, but he's widely unwelcome in the area, even in areas that are controlled by the Saudi-led coalition. And also terrorist organizations, terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS have had major activity in South Yemen. And have, in fact, at the beginning of the war, worked. There's been documented cases of the Saudi-led coalition working alongside groups like Al-Qaeda in the south against the Houthis. And so it's created a certain, vacuum, security vacuum, that doesn't necessarily mean that people want to go to those areas. So the displacement is wide. There are some people who are displaced into Saudi-led control areas and some people who are displaced in Houthi-led areas.
So there are three areas then. There's a Houthi-led area, there is a Al-Qaeda-led area, and then there is a Saudi Emirate-led area. So there are three different areas at least.
Well, there's the Houthi-led area where about 70% of the population lives, even if it's a smaller geographic area. And then the rest is kind of shared among various groups, including Saudi-led coalition, different people who are paid by different factions of the Saudi-led coalition, and some terrorist groups that are operating in the area.
So in American media, the discourse or the information which comes out, it's all focused on Saudi-led bombing and attack, which is supported by United States and other people. But a subline here and there once in a while comes that Iran supported Houthis, and in view of what happened in Syria, which was sort of Arab Spring for democracy, elections, and reform, it turned into a sectarian warfare very clearly, in which Iran and other proxy groups were involved initially. Saudi Arabia, later on, they probably went away, and Iran came in, and so is Yemeni conflict a proxy war between Iranians and Saudis?
Absolutely not. Yemen is not Syria at all. Iranians had very important strategic, concerns in Syria. Iran and Yemen could not be further apart in that region, and there is not that kind of relationship that the Iranian government had with the Syrian government, as they do with the Yemenis. And so this has, of course, been packaged as a proxy war. It fits the narrative. It's easy for people to think in terms of Sunni and Shia. That is not the case at all in Yemen. And when they say that the Houthis are Iranian-backed, what that means is very different than when we say that the Saudis are US-backed. So for example, Iranian-backed Houthis means that the Iranians and the Houthis have a positive relationship, that they get a lot of support from Iranian media, that they may get onto Skype sometimes and they might show them how to deal with some drones. That's the extent of the involvement. It's been 4 or 5 years of war. There's not been a single Iranian captured in Yemen. There's not been any evidence of Iranian weapons coming into Yemen, besides what the Saudis say every now and then without proof. But when we talk about US-backed Saudis, what we mean here is that the US and the UK and the French are helping the Saudis and Emiratis every step of the way. So they are helping them target sites in Yemen. They are helping them train their soldiers. They're helping refueling. Up until 2018, they were refueling. They currently still train their pilots. They are providing logistical support every step of the way. And of course, they have sold hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons during the Obama administration and the Trump administration. So these two are not the same. You have the Houthi side who doesn't even have control over one helicopter, let alone an air force. And so every airstrike in Yemen is because of the Saudi-led coalition, and they've been able to do damage that no civil conflict in Yemen could have ever achieved. I've lived through 2 civil wars in my short time in Yemen. No civil conflict in Yemen has caused this much death and destruction. It's only this bad and this catastrophic because of US, Saudi, UAE intervention.
So
I would also like to
add then. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, especially because a lot of Muslims think it is a sectarian conflict. It is not a sectarian conflict, simply because if you look at the leadership, whether it's with the Houthi or with the Hadi government, within the same family, you have a brother working with the Houthis, and you have his brother working for the Hadi government. The same thing with the Southern Transitional Committee in Aden. You have one brother is working for them, the other brother is working for the Houthis. So and you can do that in every single household in Yemen. If you look at every single household, you have people who are divided within the same family. So this has nothing to do with a sectarian issue. I also want to touch on the
No,
airstrikes.
hold on a minute, Dr. Aisha Jumaan. If that's the situation, it's essentially a civil war.
And I also want to say that it is not a civil war because the war is led by Saudi Arabia with multiple other countries and with the support of the UK, France, and the US. So how can that be a civil war when the war started with an announcement from Washington, D.C. by the Saudi ambassador, when the decision to continue or not continue is held by the Saudi-led coalition. So it is not a civil war. It's actually an international aggression on the population of Yemen.
So answer me a little bit difficult question here. If it is not sectarian war, if it is not civil war, why within a family, brother is on one side, other brother and sister is on the other side? Why families are divided? On what basis? Because it cannot be a tribal war because they are part of the same tribe and a family probably. It cannot be sectarian war, probably family all follows the either Shia or Sunni or whatever their belief system is. And so help me understand. I mean, I am bewildered. I asked once a friend who was a Yemeni, please give me 1 page 101 of Yemeni conflict to understand. And that was before the Saudi bombing and all those things. So just to understand, because when I think, I'm a political scientist. When I think of Yemen, I always think of fights and civil wars or conflicts. Now, one of the answer came from Professor Al-Adeimi. She is saying it is the curse of the, well, she didn't use the word curse, is the strategic location. The oil flows through that and different groups and parties want to dominate that. How come Yemenis could not take advantage of strategic positioning to actually benefit from other world powers competing from it? I simply want to understand these things.
Okay, so I will simplify it to our household here in the U.S. So there are three of us, and some of us are Republicans, some of us are Democrats. And it's the same thing in Yemen. So within a family, some are with some parties. So it is the politics of it. It's not the religion. So within a family, you have people who support one political party that's aligned with the Saudis, and another one is, supporting another political party that is aligned with the Houthis. So it has nothing really to do with the religion or it's being a civil war. It's as simple as that, if it gets to that. So that's how I see it in my perspective.
And I would add, I absolutely agree. This is not. I would say that this is no longer a civil war. So one could argue that from 2011 to 2014, there was a lot of civil unrest. It started by Yemenis wanting to change the dictatorship. Basically, we had a president who told us it was a republic, who told us there were elections every 5 years, that he would win 99% of the vote. He was a man who was highly corrupt, so there's no question about that. Internationally, he's quite well known. He was a strong ally of the United States and a strong ally of Saudi Arabia. He too, by the way, was Zaydi Muslim. So sectarianism didn't come into play when the Saudis were, one of their biggest allies in the region, Ali Abdullah Saleh, was a Zaydi Yemeni. That wasn't an issue. Back in the 1930s, when Yemenis were trying to overthrow the monarchy in North Yemen, who was a Zaydi monarchy, the Saudi Arabians were their biggest allies because they wanted to maintain the monarchists. Again, strategic interest for Saudi Arabia to maintain control over a country that has so much say and or so much control over that geopolitical location. Now, what happened, unfortunately, is that we ended up being stuck with a corrupt politician, a dictator, for 30-something years, who he amassed wealth for himself and his family, and Yemen continued to remain poor. And so you're asking subjugated people to rise, and they tried, and they did in 2011, and unfortunately got co-opted by his allies. So some people who were enriched by the system, who were part of the establishment that people were protesting against, they turned that violent. And since then, we've seen attempts at agreements. There was a UN attempt, and various parties had agreed to that. The Houthis were a group among many Yemenis who were voicing concern over Saleh, and he had led 6 wars against them in the 2000s, in the early 2000s. But it wasn't until the Saudi-led coalition interfered in 2015 that you can no longer say that at that point there was a civil war. When you have the Hadi government who cannot do a single thing without the order of Saudi Arabia or the UAE, when they're based in Riyadh currently and have been over the past 5 years, they don't call any of the shots. And they're entirely funded by the US and the UK, and and the Saudis themselves are not able to produce any weapons or lead anything without support from the United States. You can no longer say that this is a civil war. What started as a civil conflict is now an international attack on a country that's not even able to fight back.
And I also want to add, you used the exact correct words, Shireen, when you said it was a civil unrest that became an aggression on Yemen, a war on Yemen. Because before that, there was no widespread violence, there was no widespread fighting. It was, skirmishes here and there, but it's only when the Saudi got into it with the bombing, and it was a full-fledged war on Yemen. So I like that you did use the word, it was unrest. It wasn't a full-fledged war before the Saudi.
Does it mean that Yemenis in America are united and they have the same opinion to stop? This is not a civil war, it's a war. It must be stopped, or there are multiple Yemeni groups here. So Yemenis are divided over there and Yemenis are divided in America. What will be the correct situation?
I mean, like Dr. Jumaan said, poll 10 Americans and you'll find 3 Trump supporters, maybe 1 classical conservative, and the rest
but so far
Democrat.
there is no civil war here. They're not killing each other. Well, protesting, yes.
I mean, it's the same thing, though. People have different political affiliations. Some people think that what the Saudis are doing is justified because the Houthis are such a big problem in Yemen. Other people are supporting the Houthis. Other people don't support any group and are anti-intervention. And I would count myself.
Are you telling me there are some people in America who are supporting Saudis?
Unfortunately, yes. Just like you see in any other country where people support killing as a means to an end. And we see that, unfortunately, in the Yemeni community too. But I just want to express here that we are not different than other people in the world. We are not a monolith. We shouldn't be expected to have the same exact view. I think it's unfortunate that people would support bombing of and starvation of children as a means to an end. But that's just the reality of the human experience, that people support different groups.
In America, Muslim community in last 4 years have raised $1.3 billion through masjids for taking care of the Syrian refugees and helping them medical supplies and all that. That's just the masjid. This is not the US government money. How much do you think, and this was all led by Syrians in America, and of course other organizations, Muslims participating, and they recognize as a major tragedy. Do you feel that Muslim Americans are as much motivated and supporting the tragedy in Yemen?
Shireen, go ahead and I'll follow you.
I personally feel that Yemenis have been absolutely disappointed by the lack of organization and response from the Muslim community in America and in many parts of the world. It's as though the conflict wasn't even going on for much of it. It's, I remember when I was organizing even a fundraiser for Doctors Without Borders in Yemen back in 2015, in 2016 in Boston area, I was just ignored by a lot of Muslim organizations just to advertise the fundraiser, let alone, show up and buy a $25 ticket to and get fed a Yemeni meal. And so it's been very frustrating.
It was for Doctors Without Borders.
And it was for Doctors Without Borders. We weren't talking about anything political. We just were trying to raise money for Doctors Without Borders in Yemen. I called Doctors Without Borders, and they agreed to have a direct pipeline to earmark all the funds that were gathered for that cause, and people would just either ignore my emails or say that they couldn't advertise, or they would say that they would advertise or that they would show up. One person showed up from the Muslim community who was outside of my friend circle, and so I think it's been. There are many reasons why this happens. I try not to dwell on it too much, but I certainly feel like there's been, I would even say, a betrayal felt among some of us in the Yemeni community, feeling that this conflict just doesn't seem to register as much as other conflicts, despite its overwhelming, impact on human lives.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Shireen Al-Adeimi. I understand what you're saying. I feel that way as well. And I pray for you, because I know that I work on multiple causes. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. And especially causes for some reason which don't get attention. I work on Rohingya causes, and I work on the Kashmiri causes, Indian Muslims, and I know traction sometimes is difficult. And that's why God Almighty has told us in the Quran that all prophets were sent down to help people, so help people stand up for peace, justice, fairness, and equity. And I feel the same way, Dr. Aisha Jumaan, that your struggle to help and redevelop is a long struggle. But you and I are successful if we do our best. Muslims have many causes, but if some of us can focus just one cause at a time and pray for the rest of the causes. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for sparing your time. And I hope people who are not aware of Yemen and what is going on there, who are watching this, will feel motivated after listening to sane voices which explain what is happening. And also American Muslims not doing much for it. You're watching Muslim Network TV. We are on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as Amazon Fire TV, Roku, Apple Television, Apple TV, as well as social media, and always on muslimnetwork.tv. Thank you so much, Aliza Majid, for producing today's show, and Sumaya Heather. Peace. Salam.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thanks.